Good morning. My name is Mark Denzler, President and CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association. Thank you for joining our third webinar. Today's focus will be unemployment insurance. The unprecedented crisis that's ongoing in the United States recently required a stay-in-place order by Governor Pritzker that will save lives, but certainly result in economic hardship for employers across the state. The IMA has been getting numerous questions about how the unemployment insurance system works, when individuals can apply for benefits, and if workers may apply for benefits is asked to self-quarantine, among other things. If you have questions at this time, please submit to ima@ima-net.org. Today, Tom Chan, Director of the Illinois Department of Employment Security, will join us, along with Trina Taylor, who is the Executive Deputy Director of Service Delivery, and Justin Brissett, Unemployment Insurance Program Director at the Illinois Department of Employment Security. Director Chan is being called away to another meeting this morning, so we'll offer some introductory comments and then turn it over to his team. Before I ask Director Chan to say a few words, I would note that this is not official legal advice. Every case has unique facts and circumstances, and so the guidance that is provided today is general in nature and not binding on any specific case. With that being said, it's my pleasure to now introduce Tom Chan, Director of the Illinois Department of Employment Security. Tom?
Thanks, Mark. And as Mark said, unfortunately, I will have to be pulled away here, but I would like to open up the call and just thank all of you and thank Mark and the Manufacturers Association, who's a vital stakeholder in the unemployment insurance program and understands from a high-level perspective, a global perspective, how this is impacting our Illinois employers and our Illinois employees, and so is a valuable resource to the department and to the administration as we're moving through this. Just at a high level, I'll tell you that IDES is operating on two tracks right now. The first track that we're doing is we're delivering our unemployment insurance program, which is probably why most of you are calling in today. How does that program work? What are some of the things that you need to be thinking about as you're looking through the lens of the employer? And Trina and Justin Brissett in our shop are the people that deliver that program when people file for unemployment, when we reach out to employers to get information about separations and things of that. The second thing that our agency is doing is we're trying to plan for the future along with the administration. Those conversations are happening now, and they're going to continue to happen over the coming days and weeks and months, depending on how long this thing lasts. As I said, Mark Denzler is at the table at those conversations. I believe, Mark, you were meeting with our governor yesterday. Our governor has taken certain actions, as Mark mentioned, the details of which we can get into through our team if you'd like. But in general, we're trying to expand access to the unemployment program in the short term, in the immediate need, and then the most important thing is what's coming next. Hopefully, we see some further assistance from the federal government. So with that, I do have to jump off to put out a different fire. But as Mark mentioned, Trina Taylor is our Executive Deputy Director. She's been with the department for a very long time, and Justin Brissett as well as our UA Program Director. And thanks to the both of you for standing in my shoes, and thank you to Mark. IDES is here for all of you and through Mark. And so if there's questions that you don't have answered today, please be sure to reach out to Mark or to our department again in the future.
Thank you very much, Director, and best of luck in these trying times. With that, I would ask Trina or Justin maybe to start, and if you could give everyone kind of an overview of the UI system, how individuals can apply, when they can start applying, and then maybe other information that you believe employers should know at this critical time.
Okay, thank you. This is Justin, and I'll start with an overview of the system. So to respond to the first question, basically people can file as soon as they are no longer physically working. There's no waiting period in order for them to submit an application. Up until now, up until when sort of we have maybe we're approaching a new normal, people tended to wait a few days to see if they would be called back if they were on temporary layoff and they didn't know when they would be called back. But what we always suggest to people is that you always have the right to submit a claim. And if you, for some reason, don't need the benefits, then you just don't follow through on the claim. So to get into some of the particulars about filing the claim, first of all, approximately 60% of our claims are filed online, and the remaining approximately 40% are filed via our call center. So as you can imagine, our systems, our front doors, which nowadays are the call center and the internet, are receiving extreme levels of traffic, and so they're being tested. We are encouraging people to submit their claim online. In fact, the entire claim can be managed electronically. So now, depending on when, and Mark, you can stop me if you want to interject with a question or if you need some clarification here. So depending on when the claim is filed determines the earnings that we are looking at. So, for example, up until the end of this month, we are looking at earnings from October 2018 through September 2019. And then starting in April, we will be looking at the entire calendar year worth of earnings for 2019. So when an individual submits their claim, since employers are already reporting their wages on a monthly and or quarterly basis, the Social Security number is recognized and it's tied into those wages. So there's no additional step typically that the individual has to take in order to prove their wages. So within that 4-quarter period of time, the individual has to have earned at least $1,600 total within at least 2 different quarters. So the wages are used to establish the weekly benefit amount. And so the claim lasts for 52 weeks. 26 of those weeks are payable at this point. And right now I'm just talking about the standard claim. And so if one were to collect straight through, then that's 6 months. Often there's the instance where the individual files a claim, collects for 6 weeks, and then either goes back to work or for whatever reason stops collecting. And then if they're laid off again, they come back into the system during that same benefit year, during that same 52-week period, and then they have the 20 weeks remaining on their account. So again, the weekly benefit amount is dependent on one's earnings. The minimum per week is $51, and the maximum is $484 a week. There's an additional amount if the claimant has a child under 18 or a non-working spouse. And as far as those numbers are concerned, the additional amount for the child is $185 per week. And then the non-working spouse would be $93 per week. So the spouse is worthless. The spouse is worth less. So are there any questions so far?
So I appreciate that, Justin. One of the questions that came in, and I think you briefly hit upon it, were what happens if employees go on and off unemployment with the same employer? So, for example, a question by an employer if they decide to furlough their shift and maybe do 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, can an employee apply for benefits for those 2 weeks while they're on furlough? Or if any employer decides to maybe furlough their employers for 3 or 4 weeks, how does that work with the unemployment insurance system?
So that's the exact intention of the program, is to provide that support while the individual is out of work, and in this instance, while the individual is furloughed for 3 or 4 weeks or so. So what they would be doing is they would be basically reopening that initial claim that they filed. Does that speak to your question?
It does. And then another question that came in with regard to furloughs. In the event of a furlough, and if you're able to answer this, will an employee need to exhaust any PTO time or vacation time before they're eligible to claim unemployment insurance benefits?
So that's an interesting question. Generally speaking, no. I mean, there are some instances in which paid time off, depending on how it's classified, we would consider disqualifying income. So, for example, vacation pay is disqualifying income. But the unemployment system is not requiring for the individual to be in receipt of the vacation pay. So if the employer is, if that's basically something that has been arranged by the employer and the employee, or somehow the employer is requiring it, or the individual is requesting it, then we only consider it disqualifying income if the employer protests.
Okay.
If there's no employer protest, then we won't even ask about it.
Okay, and that's an important point for folks on the call, that if employees do seek, or employees that are separated do seek unemployment insurance benefit, the employers will receive probably an email or some reach out from the department asking whether they protest the claim. And what you're saying is if employers don't protest the claim, then it would move forward with benefits, correct?
Correct, and thanks for bringing up that point. So as soon as the individual files a claim, then that following day, we are sending a notice of claim to the employer. And there's basically two versions of that notice. There's the one that identifies the employer as the chargeable employer, or the other one as the non-chargeable employer. So generally speaking, we charge the last 30-day employer. So the employer that the claimant indicates that they last worked with for at least 30 physical days. And so on that form, it indicates that there's 10 days, there's a 10-day protest period. We also, and so there's two methods of receiving that form. One is by paper, and then the other is electronically through a system that we call SIDES. Not sure if the audience has any familiarity with the SIDES system, but it's a secure and efficient method, and basically you would get an email indicating that a claim has been filed. You would have a PIN number. You'd go retrieve. You'd go to our MyTax Illinois website and go retrieve that that notice of claim, and then you could respond electronically as well. But either way, it's 10 days. And you're right. If the employer says nothing about it, then we won't even be asking the claimant.
Okay. Justin, I know that the department is being inundated right now with claims. We've heard from one or two members that they get an error when filing that says we could not validate the information you entered. And obviously your staff is working at home and they're having a hard time getting somebody on the phone. Are there steps or recommendations you have for somebody when employees are getting that information that says they can't validate the information?
Yeah, we are trying to rectify that problem, and I've been hearing from a couple of different avenues that people are having that problem. The overwhelming majority of people are not having that problem. One of the recommendations would be that they indicate their so one of the things that we look for when people file the claim is to provide information according to how it's documented on either their state ID or driver's license. And the other thing we're looking for is for people to indicate their name as it's shown on their Social Security card. Since we are running validation against the Secretary of State and the Social Security Administration, if the names are not listed on the claim, how they're listed on the Social Security number, and then the other information we're looking for from the state ID, then it won't pass validation. One of the other problems that happens regarding validation is if, for example, the employer is listing their wages under a different name. So, for example, if their name is Robert, their first name is Robert, but everybody calls them Bob at work, and that's how the employer is reporting their wages under Bob. And then the individual, of course, lists their name on the claim as Robert, then they'll get a rejection.
Okay. And talking
Mark,
about yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to what Justin was also saying. And I know that we've got a lot of complaints in receiving that message, and it's not necessarily that the individuals are entering in the incorrect information. It's the interfaces that we're having with the other agencies aren't able to keep up with the volume. So that is also what's slowing down. So yes, people are entering the right information. It's just the other agencies aren't able to keep up.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of process, a lot of people have asked the question, and one of the steps that Governor Pritzker took was waiving the initial 1-week waiting period. And I think, and there's a lot of questions that come, that doesn't mean that they're going to get paid any quicker. It means when their first check or benefit check comes, they get essentially 2 weeks of benefits instead of 1. Can you kind of tell the group, when someone applies, about how long does it take for that individual to get that first check from the state, that first benefit check?
So the claim begins the week in which it is filed. It takes approximately 2 weeks for that first payment to be received. So, and we didn't get into this part yet, but most of the claim functions are basically handled by the claimant. So they're filing the claim and they're self-attesting to all the information and to its accuracy on the claim itself. And then when they go and request payment, they're answering a series of questions, and they do that every other week. So every time they what we call certify for benefits, they're responding to the events of the prior 2 weeks. So if we could just take this week for an example, here we are on the 24th. As long as the claim is filed any day this week up until Saturday, the claim will start effective, as it always done, as it always is, which is on a Sunday. So the claim would be effective on Sunday the 22nd, and then depending on their Social Security number, they would either certify for benefits on Monday the 6th, Tuesday the 7th, or Wednesday the 8th. So they would go in and certify, let's just say this individual, they're filing today, and based on their Social Security number, they're going to certify for benefits, for the payment of benefits on Monday the 6th, and then they should expect to receive a 2-week payment on approximately Wednesday the 8th.
Okay, thank you. Can you also address some of the questions we're getting are the guidance from CDC and public health officials are that if an individual is diagnosed with COVID or is in close proximity, they're being advised to self-quarantine at home for 2 weeks. How are those individuals treated? Are they able to apply for unemployment insurance benefits? Or do they actually have to officially be separated from the company? But if they're told to stay home for 2 weeks because of a quarantine, can you explain how unemployment insurance may or may not work in that situation?
Sure. So if an individual continues to receive their regular pay, it's likely that we would consider them as not an unemployed individual, even if they're not physically working. But more to your point about the person who has been determined to have been affected by COVID-19 and they're quarantined at home, as Director Chan mentioned, we are trying to make benefit eligibility as flexible as possible. So we would expect for that person to be able and available for work. And one of the things we're trying to improve is our messaging on these emergency rules, which addresses these individuals who are either laid off because of temporary closing due to COVID-19, or they themselves have been quarantined. And so we are encouraging people to maybe be more flexible in how they think about the type of work that they are willing to accept and the manner in which they go about looking for work.
And I think that's an important point because one of the executive orders by the governor waived that availability for work requirement. And maybe you want to just address that very briefly, what that change means for an individual.
So we are still expecting for the individual to be able and available for work. And so again, we're encouraging people to again consider the alternative. So for example, if they normally work, let's just say for the last 5 years, they've been working in the manufacturing industry. And so they've been quarantined, and so now they quite possibly are not able to work in that industry. But let's just say, for example, that individual has other skills, or the skills that they've obtained in the last 5 years from working in the industry, or for example, prior to working in the manufacturing industry, they speak another language, and so they know how to translate a second or third language. Now, consider the fact that a lot of work nowadays can be done from home. Now, maybe most of work in the manufacturing industry cannot be done from the confines of one's bedroom, but there are other opportunities out there that we're asking people to consider in terms of being able and available for work.
Okay. We're getting a lot of questions as well, and there's a lot of confusion about how unemployment insurance interacts, for example, with the federal or the Family Medical Leave Act, the extended sick pay benefits. And my understanding is, if you're receiving the paid sick leave, that means you are still an employee of the company. If you're using the Family Medical Leave Act under the Families First federal legislation, you are still employed by the company. So just if you can, talk about the interaction of unemployment insurance benefits versus or in addition to or in concert with kind of how FMLA works or paid sick leave works. And the fact, again, that you have to be separated from the company, correct?
Right, and by separated, we're simply saying that the individual is not working, whether or not they expect to return to work at that same company.
Right. So an employee who is taking the paid sick leave, for example, under federal legislation or extended Family Medical Leave Act, they are not eligible for unemployment insurance, correct?
So we do look at individuals on a case-by-case basis, but if the reason that they're no longer working for said company is because they qualify, for example, for FMLA, and based on the stipulations of how they qualified for that, if that means that they're not able and available for work, then generally speaking, that person would not qualify for benefits.
Okay. One of the other questions that we're getting quite a bit is the impact on the employer community. Right now, if an employer has to separate individuals from the company, whether it's a layoff or shutdown, the employer is charged for that. Is there any change currently? And I know the IMA has contemplated legislation to universalize this, but right now, if an employer were to lay off an individual, that is charged back to the individual employer, correct?
As of right this very moment, that is correct, yes.
Yeah, and for listeners on the call, the IMA and the business community, the Retail Merchants Association, the Chamber of Commerce, and others are pushing legislation in Springfield that would universalize that as opposed to making it solely on the individual employer. We talked a lot, Justin, and this is good, and we've gotten a couple questions coming in about individuals who may have just reduced hours, for example. If someone reduces an employee's hours from 40 to 20, is that individual able to apply for any kind of unemployment insurance benefit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is it depends. So again, the individual has the right to file a claim, and depending on their weekly benefit amount will determine whether or not they qualify. So let's just say, for example, the individual qualifies for the maximum weekly benefit amount of $484 a week. If those 20 hours bring them below that amount, then they would qualify for something. So the way that it works is an individual can earn up to half of their weekly benefit amount and still have their full, their partial earnings in this instance, and the full weekly benefit amount. Once they go over half, then we start deducting dollar for dollar. And of course, once they start earning more than $484, then they just are not eligible.
Okay. Looking at other questions, we're getting a couple that have indicated they've not received any paper or electronic notifications yet of claims filed. About how long does that take if an employee has filed unemployment insurance? I know you notify the employer. How quickly can they be expected to get that or to see that? And if they're not receiving that, how should they reach out to the department if they know that employees have filed for unemployment insurance, but they're not getting notifications?
So it usually takes, things are going through the mail to the claimant. So it usually takes 3 to 7 days to receive what we call, what's labeled as the UI finding. The UI finding indicates it confirms that the claim has been received and entered, and it indicates the earnings that are being used to establish the weekly benefit amount. It identifies the weekly benefit amount and the dependent allowance if applicable. And then it also indicates the payment method, which we didn't mention up until now. But once the individual files a claim, we will issue a debit card. We recommend that people, again, with this theme of handling everything electronically, we recommend that people register to receive their payment via direct deposit to their checking or savings account. And they do that online, either when they file the claim or at any point after. The other thing that's on the UI finding is their tax election, because these benefits are taxable at both the state and the federal level. And the individual chooses at the time of claim filing, and this can be changed at any point thereafter, whether to have taxes deducted automatically or to pay at the end of the year. Going back to your question, it usually takes 3 to 7 days. I'm not, I'm getting my mail here. Haven't really been paying attention to how timely it is, and I'm not sure what the situation is throughout the rest of the state. If the Postal Service is experiencing delays. And so as far as the individual, there's a number of different ways that we can be contacted. But you gave the example of somebody going to their employer and saying, hey, I didn't get my letter and I'm having a difficult time reaching out to the agency. Mark, maybe we can discuss, if there's some way that, we can create a channel either through your association, to try to navigate those inquiries. But if it's been more than 7 days, then we're asking people to contact us to inquire.
Thank you. And to that point, for those on the call, if you're a member of the IMA or the retail merchants or any of the other business associations that are on this call, if you do have those questions and you can't get through to the Department of Employment Security, please feel free to send us those questions and we will do our best to put you in contact with appropriate people at the department. I know they are struggling to meet this challenge. They're doing it extremely well in a very difficult time. But for those on the call, please, if you're a member of an association, let us know, and we're happy to work with Justin and Trina and the director and others to get your questions answered. Another question that has come in, Justin, is what happens if an employee voluntarily were to separate from the company? For example, if a company makes a decision that they need to reduce headcount and they ask if any employers are willing to voluntarily separate for a period of time, what needs to happen to ensure that those workers can get unemployment insurance benefits? Because if somebody leaves on their own, technically they're not eligible because they quit. So should in those cases of an employee saying, hey, I will volunteer to stay at home and get unemployment insurance, the employer still needs to take the official action, correct? So the employee can get benefits?
You're right. Trina, if you have something to add to this, but yes, generally speaking, we're looking at who is the moving party.
So it's an important thing for employers to consider if you are asking employees who may be interested in taking a voluntary separation for a period of time. The employee shouldn't simply kind of quit for a period of time. You'll have to notify them that you're separating them from the company for them to be able to qualify for unemployment insurance benefits. Let's see, some other questions that are coming in. Let's see here. Again, the stay at home seems to be a very common question. Again, if maybe we can repeat that if a company is deemed non-essential under the governor's executive order, and therefore that company cannot operate, are those employees eligible for unemployment insurance?
Yes. And so one of the things that the emergency rules did is that in the example you just gave, it basically waives registration with our employment exchange system, which is basically our employment services system that basically couples with the benefits system, in that we attempt to help people find jobs. But in the example that you just gave, we would not be requiring people to register with our employment services system. And but yes, they would be eligible for benefits.
Okay. In terms of eligibility, we've had a couple questions that have come in. How do UI benefits apply, for example, maybe gig workers, excuse me, who might be driving for an Uber or Lyft? Or secondly, what a small company, or actually any size company, if they all shut down for 4 weeks, can even, for example, the owner or president of a company also apply for unemployment insurance benefits? Is there any limited or any parameters around of folks that may not be able to apply for unemployment insurance?
There are some restrictions for the owner of the company, depending on how that company is set up, either as a corporation or some other sort of entity. There are some restrictions. I could what I could do is, after the call, I can follow up with some examples and cite certain sections of the Act. At this point, in terms of the flexibility we talked about, that's not been on the table. And you talked about gig workers, and there's so many different sorts of examples that we could come up with. But I guess the typical Lyft and Uber driver, despite how those companies might view them, if they're viewing them as independent contractors and not employees, that's not how the unemployment system sees them. So we're looking at those drivers as employees, and we're expecting for them to report their earnings to the system when they go in to certify every other week.
And that, again, I'd like to reiterate that's an important point that I raised at the beginning, that, again, this conversation is not official legal advice. As Justin has indicated, every case has individual facts and circumstances. And so the guidance that we're talking about today and the questions are general in nature and not binding on any specific case, because every case has its own unique facts and circumstances. There's been some discussion, and you mentioned it earlier, but I think it's worth repeating again, that currently an unemployed worker is eligible for up to 26 weeks of benefits, and those can go on and off. You mentioned earlier if somebody's working 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. Can you talk about, I think in 2000 or after 9/11 and maybe in 08, 09, what steps would have to be taken for extended benefits to kick in? I know a couple times they've been allowed up to 52 weeks, but what circumstances would it take, or are there parameters set where there would be extended benefits kick in longer than 26 weeks?
That's a really good question. Trina, if you want to take this, otherwise I'll just continue.
Mm-hmm. I can just say real quickly, those parameters have not yet been set. There's discussion with the U.S. Department of Labor on how we're going to move forward with any type of extensions and what that actually looks like and when and under what circumstances that will actually kick in.
Thank you. And I know there's, I believe, discussions, again, the point of this call is where we stand currently, and it's, again, important to remind folks that federal legislation is moving, state legislation could be moving. So, again, the guidance is general in nature because these things are changing very, very rapidly. We're getting some more questions just kind of on network and system. That employers who are trying to, or employees who are trying to apply for unemployment, but maybe haven't filed in years or can't remember their password, and employers that may not be able to get on the system. Is there advice that you can give them? I know you're upgrading the system. Is it just a matter of time and patience, or how can they get in and get information if the system's not allowing them in?
Well, Justin, I can take this one. My initial response is patience, because normally those who are having difficulty online, we would refer them to call our call center. But as everyone's aware, the volume of calls we're receiving are hitting capacity. So we would just ask for your patience, and if you call and it is at capacity, just try your call later, and we'll be there to assist you.
Thank you. And again, it is just patience. And for those on the phone, the department is dealing with kind of an unprecedented increase in the number of individuals who are filing, and it's going up very, very, very quickly. And they're doing their best to stay on top of this. Thinking, and again, is there any distinction that the department sees between a furlough versus a layoff? As long as they are separated from the company, they're eligible. It doesn't matter, or does it matter if there's a difference in terminology between furlough or layoff?
So I'm not really sure what the distinction is myself. I think the question is really, is the individual working or not? Or are they are they an unemployed individual? And typically that means that they're not working and they're not getting paid as well.
What about maybe an apprentice that is working at a manufacturing facility that's in school? The employer is paid for that apprentice's schooling, but they are no longer working on the factory floor. You know, it's kind of a unique situation, but a lot of manufacturers are using apprentices who are students. Would an apprentice be eligible for unemployment insurance, or is that a specific case-by-case basis?
I would need to go and take another look at the act, but offhand, nothing is popping out in my mind. But I think what it comes down to is if the individual as an apprentice was getting paid, and were those wages being reported to the department.
Okay. And again, I know we've just got kind of a few minutes left, but you know, some of the general rules right now, and maybe you can go back over just, you know, in very general, but that employees can begin applying for unemployment insurance on the first day. It's currently 26 weeks. But again, I think the important thing we're getting asked a lot about, and I just ask you one more time to comment, are facilities that are having to close or reduce hours because of the coronavirus, or employees who are asked to stay home to self-quarantine for 14 days. Just again, generally how the Unemployment Insurance Act is applicable and relates to kind of generally some of those situations.
So for the individuals who are temporarily laid off because of the employer had to temporarily close because of COVID-19, we are not expecting for those individuals to register with our employment services system. We are still expecting for them to be able and available for work.
Okay. And so along that line, if a facility is open, but the employee voluntarily chooses to stay home, they're not sick, a family member's not sick, and that employee just says, I'm not coming in, I don't feel comfortable, they are not eligible for unemployment insurance. Is that correct?
If that means that they're not able to work and not available for work, and they're not otherwise going to be looking for work, then that's correct. They would not be eligible.
Okay. Thank you. Well, those are kind of the general questions that we've had come in today. I know that you are extremely busy. For those folks who are on the phone, I would note that the Department of Employment Security website has a very good question and answer section. The Illinois Manufacturers Association has a dedicated COVID-19 website. We have a question and answer section as well that we'll be updating with some additional information regarding unemployment insurance benefits and questions that employers have. So if you continue to have questions, please email them to the IMA. We will do our best to respond as quickly as possible. And again, I appreciate Director Chan and your team, Trina and Justin, for being on the call today. And again, I urge everyone to be safe. We will continue providing as much information as quickly and accurately as we can to members of the IMA and the business community. So thank you very much for your time today, and everyone be safe. And if we could do anything, please let us know.
Thanks for your time, and appreciate the question.